This is Tony Pappert. I'm speaking to you from the Detroit area. Our speaker tonight is Brian Lance. Many of you know him, speaking from Houston, Texas. The subject is the reality of economic growth right now. This is extremely important politically because Americans don't know what's going on in the economy, and they look to official statistics to tell them, and these statistics are not telling them anything very useful. Whereas the Trump policies have launched economic growth, which is underway right this minute as we're speaking, and you don't have to wait for the next monthly or quarterly statistics. So, very important picture from Brian, which you can't get anyplace else, as far as I know. So let me just pass it to Brian. There you go.
Okay. Well, good to be here. I hope many of you saw clips of or heard about the rally in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania yesterday. That was May 30th. And that rally, attended by thousands of people, and I don't know the number of steel workers, but they were there all arrayed behind President Trump. The rally was to announce the developing partnership between U.S. Steel, once the largest company in the United States, and the largest steel producer in the world, but now just a shadow of that today, and Nippon Steel of Japan, but a partnership in which Japan is going to invest on the order of $14 billion into U.S. Steel, recovering mothballed plants and also expanding further to meet growing U.S. steel needs in the growing economy. And I'll come back to that a little bit later, but that goes exactly to this point. This rally was held at the Irvine Steelworks. That's in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania, yesterday. And Trump announced the tariffs on steel and aluminum are going up this coming week, to 50% on imported steel and aluminum. So that's a heck of a wall protecting U.S. steel production and creating the environment for that investment into U.S. steel to pay off for everyone. This is going to be tens of thousands of additional jobs. So this is the kind of growth that's already underway in the United States. This is in energy, it's in manufacturing, it's in investment, both domestic and then foreign investment that's coming in part in a consequence of the tariffs. They want to be here. They want to build factories here to avoid paying tariffs to try to get their products in. And Trump is welcoming that. And so in this environment, as I said in a little intro to this class that we put out, President Donald Trump, is in a position similar to that of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt got elected in 1932, and in the off-year election in 1934, he won a supermajority, picking up 9 seats in both the House and the Senate. And this is actually what Trump is set for if this expansion, which for all good reasons we should expect can continue. There's going to be a fight along the way, but it's going to continue. And that supermajority, including many more true Trump Republicans of the new Republican Party of Producers, will ensure that the rest of Trump's agenda program is adopted. So I want to stress this. I mean, right now, of course, we have close majorities in the Senate and the House. It's 53 to 42 or or well, 45 plus 2, so 47, 52 to 47 in the Senate. It's close, likewise in the House, 220 to 212 right now. So these are thin majorities, and of course, this is what's being played. But I want to get to a point here. You know, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist of London, of course, the lamestream media, social media platforms, much of them have just been spouting what is really, I mean, they're really acting nuts. Spouting this line about the massive deficit that Trump is creating with this big, beautiful bill. Some are kind of also then pointing to the proposed bill for 2026, the fiscal 2026 bill, which was passed to the Senate, House, to the Congress generally on May 2nd by the White House. All of it just with the idea that this is all just feeding a huge deficit, and this is destroying the economy. When in fact, the reality is, if the American people play a bigger role in this process right now, in terms of shaking up the Senate to pass the big, beautiful bill and move on, if they play a bigger role with talking to their neighbor, because their neighbor is really the target of this media, Senate, etc. Circus. If your neighbor is educated, then not only will Trump find himself with a solid supermajority in the off-year election in 2028, but will be doing much, much more and doing it better. I want to say this court decision in the Federal Trade Court there in Manhattan that temporarily halted, on paper anyway, tariffs, the reciprocal tariff that President Trump had announced back on April 2nd, is now on hold on appeal, which is good. But this is exactly the kind of battle, reflects the kind of battle we're actually in. Behind the media, of course, it's Wall Street, it's the City of London, it's the central banking system, it's the monetarist financial system that's destroyed the economy over the last 50 years plus. They are absolutely freaked out that Trump is going to get that supermajority, that Trump is on the roll, and the American people know it. I mean, there's polls coming out, data coming out. Americans believe, they assess that Trump will win the next midterm. That is, his people will get elected in the midterm election of 2028. And of course, rolling on from there, J.D. Vance has been named to head the Finance Committee for the 2028 midterms. And of course, that's setting him up to be the presidential candidate in the following presidential election. If just assuming things move forward the way they are at the moment. But Trump moved from the day he came into office, declaring a national energy emergency. This was based on the threat to national security and the economy, of the collapse of the grid, the growing brownouts and blackouts, but more broadly, the fact that, the economic guts of the country were diseased, were unraveling. His grounds for that tariff decision in April 2nd and the other tariffs prior and since, including the steel tariff, are absolutely essential for the United States. There's complete constitutional grounds for what President Trump did under the National Energy Emergency National Energy Act, which then empowered him to utilize the International Emergency Economic Power Act to impose the tariffs. It's straightforward. It is vital national security It is a energy and economic emergency, as the president spelled out. So Trump has a right. It's reasonable to be optimistic, for him to be optimistic in terms of the midterm election. I'm emphasizing this because there's so much of this. Oh, you always, the party in power always loses seats in the off-year election. Well, that ain't always so, and we are not in normal times. He's got good reason to be optimistic. Just step back. There's the tariffs. You may have seen these figures that came out on Friday. Our trade deficit, was cut in half in 1 month. And this last month, cut in half in 1 month. Inflation is now down to officially 2.1% in terms of core inflation. The steel sector, you have the U.S. Steel Nippon agreement. You've got a new steel mill going up in Louisiana. Natural gas, we have tens of gigawatts of natural gas power, natural gas powered, combined cycle powered electricity already set to be built and coming online. We halted the shutdown of coal, and there's rest, and the working average American, if there is such a thing, sees that. It's visible to him that these things are catching hold. There's $5 trillion in investment, not counting foreign sovereign wealth fund money and whatnot. $5 trillion in commitments for new investment. So this is going to roll. This will continue to roll. What is the average American, the working American, going to get out of the big beautiful bill? No tax on overtime. What does that mean? Well, according to the Council of Economic Advisors, approximately, that means the average overtime worker, people that get, they depend on overtime as part of their work schedule, really, in reality. They're going to be collecting an additional $1,400 to $1,700 a year in overtime money. That they will save that in taxes, what would otherwise go to taxes. No tax on tip, another $1,675 per year that will be in the pockets of that worker and his family to spend on necessities. Social Security, a deduction as it now stands that will go to $4,000 per person, a deduction on Social Security, now as a formula of the additional income if one is working after reaching 65 or after taking Social Security. That income plus interest income plus half of Social Security, that sets a ceiling. Well, the deduction now will go from $2,000 to $4,000 for an individual, and for a husband or wife to $8,000. The Senate may strengthen it and ensure that there's no taxes on Social Security at all. But all of these steps are steps that put money in the pocketbooks of working Americans. And of course, there's further projections in terms of the growth, which is the real fundamental thing we're talking about here this evening. Is the economic growth of the economy overall, which will add up to $10,000 to $13,000 to $14,000 a year in additional income overall to an American growing over the next 4, 5, 6 years. So that's what's projected on a 3% growth. We can do better, but that's what's being cooked up now. That's what the Trump administration is putting in place. There's other features. There's the Opportunity Zone program that's being reworked. So it targets rural America in particular for home development, businesses, and so forth. rural low-income areas. We'll see particular projects, particular emphasis and resources being redeployed back into building out the rest of America again. So there's other features to it, but these are important elements. All right, so let's turn to this question of the federal debt and the Treasury rates and all this, which the Wall Street Journal and London economists and all these types of folks have been fuming about. And you've probably seen the print and heard the stories, because social media and the libertarians are making noise about this as well. You know, that the big beautiful bill will create 4 to 5 trillion in the increase in the deficit, federal deficit. It doesn't do that. The big beautiful bill merely maintains the existing tax cuts that were put in place in 2017 by the Trump administration Tax and Jobs Act of that year. As a result, is simply maintaining what now exists. In fact, the current legislation doesn't run out until December of this year. It simply maintains it. Yet for the office for the Congressional Budget Office, rather, and for, economic modelers like Wharton Penn, the Wharton Penn model, and so on, these econometric models and so forth, they simply say, oh, well, this is new. No, it's not. It's the same. It's maintaining the same rates, which otherwise would, in the assessment of the Trump Council of Economic Advisors, if those tax cuts and so forth were removed, that would guarantee a recession, a deep recession in the United States. So just think through it. What are they actually trying to do here? What are people like Senator Ron Johnson doing, running around, repeating over and over again like a parrot, this idea that the big beautiful bill is going to create a $4 or $5 trillion deficit, when it does no such thing? It simply keeps in place what already is in place and ensures that we do not have a recession. What side of this is he on? Others as well have to ask that question. Rand Paul, other people have to seriously look in the mirror. Think of this in terms of narratives as well. The narrative here of this explosion, further explosion of the U.S. Federal deficit. This narrative is being fed into the markets. That narrative begins to take hold. It begins to shape the thinking. That's what the idea is, obviously, on the part of some people. And so, of course, under certain circumstances, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So on the federal deficit, look, we've been here before. We were in worse shape. In 1951, U.S. Federal debt to GDP was 106%. Right now, today, I'm speaking in terms of the U.S. public debt, not what's held, by trust funds and so forth within the government itself, but the public debt, the U.S. public debt, public debt to GDP in 1951 was 106%. Today, it's 100%. Well, we worked our way out of it. In 1951, that was the hangover from World War II. And of course, we had the Korean War. But we worked our way out of that. You can parse that in a lot of different ways. The point is, we worked our way out of it. And of course, Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and the original Congress of the United States reorganized the debt of the United States, and we worked our way out of that starting in 1790. So we've done this before. So there's no question that we can do this over time without, drastic deflationary, recessionary, actually depressionary processes being set in motion. We can manage this. And that's what Trump is out to do. We've been here before. All right. So the Wall Street Journal, let me just quote a headline. The Trump 2026 budget does not reduce the deficit. Look, the Wharton Penn model, the Office of Management and Budget do not count economic growth into their projections. That's the projection of the Wall Street Journal article. There's no growth there. I think Treasury Secretary Besson said the other day that OMB, or Congressional Budget Office, was figuring something like a 1% growth rate. So the figures they're coming out with are phony, because it's through economic growth that you pay off the debt. If you say there's no growth, well, surprise, the debt is there and it isn't reduced. And so you have these people running around with this fake story. And really, look, this is just to put some perspective on it. Think about it. This is the same way of thinking of a Parson Malthus, or the Global 2000 report, or the Limits to Growth report. They all say, well, I'm changing subjects here, but it gets to the same point. They all predicted, starting with Parson Malthus, that population is growing geometrically, but growth of the food supply, in the case of Parson Malthus, well, food supply will only grow arithmetically. And of course, then the Global 2000 report, that's Jimmy Carter and that whole crowd, the Trilateral Commission, or the Limits to Growth report put out commissioned by the Club of Rome. I mean, this is these are these environmentalists, rabid environmentalists, who say the same thing. The population is growing, but resources are running out. Why? Because they see no growth. They don't see human creativity. They don't see the transformation that's going on in the real world. They're simply crunching numbers, right? Numbers that, by the very way in which they've been structured, lie to you and me, right? So Trump is beyond that. This kind of stuff is truly cringeworthy, to borrow an expression from Sasha Stone. This is truly cringeworthy stuff. This is the enemies of progress. This is the enemies of the U.S. Constitution, who are refusing to admit that they lost in November of last year. They're refusing to admit what's underway now as a consequence of what the Trump administration, the Trump team, have put into motion, not only in government, but in the private sector, most importantly. Look, the expensing in the big, beautiful bill, the expensing of all new factory builds, the expensing, that is, you can write it off your taxes, business expense, all new factory builds, all new R&D, research and development, all new equipment that is purchased, machinery, equipment, and so forth, can be expensed. This is going to create an explosion. Actually, it already began. It started to show up in the figures in March in terms of factory utilization and investment in new capability, equipment purchases, and so on. This is going to create an explosion of growth, of employment in high wage areas, growth in the U.S. economy. further. This is how you pay off the debt. This is in the big, beautiful bill. But of course, these monetarists, these Malthusians, modern day Malthusians, don't want that growth. They hate America. They hate the United States for what it truly is, as a sovereign democratic republic committed to creation, as a nation of producers. So there's all these, monetarist studies, economic studies, and so forth. They can correlate, empirically, then government spending with inflation, and so they can correlate it. But keep in mind, these kind of correlations, it's like your dog snorts and your wife gets a call that she's won the church lottery. A correlation isn't proof that's causal. It's a correlation. When if you look at the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and how we built out of the Depression of the 1930s, if you go back to Lincoln and the greenback policy and the build out of the U.S. economy in the midst of a civil war, no, government spending, if it's invested, government spending actually grows the economy. So this idea of this connection of government spending causing inflation, growing the deficit, no, it depends on what the resources that the money mobilizes is actually spent on. If you spend it on, of course, the green new steel, well, you're burning all those resources, human and natural resources, you're throwing into a burn pit. That's the point. That's why we're canceling all that. That's already being canceled by the administration. That's what they, in general, are categorizing as deregulation these days. Getting rid of this crap that's just been burning up precious resources, human resources, and our material resources in terms of otherwise productive machinery and all the rest. The economic disaster of the last 50 years was caused by the central banks, was caused by the Wall Street financial majority. Honey, I shrunk the kids. Well, yeah, that's what they did over the course of 50 years. They shrunk the U.S. economy. Okay? So the noise and blather moved beyond it. And look, be understanding. Elon Musk has got this problem. He listens to Milton Friedman, promotes Milton Friedman, this kind of simple-minded, just shrink the spending and all will be well, without regard for what it actually would cause in terms of devastation, and not realizing the positive role of instigating into economic development that the government has to play. And the same with maybe you got a neighbor that's a libertarian or leans that way. Well, you got to help them work it. You got to work it through with them. I think it looked then at Treasury rates. Maybe this is a little obscure, but there's massive coverage of the fact that what Trump is unleashing is going to crack, to use the word used by Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase. I mean, he's kind of, Wall Street's answer to George Clooney. He's this public figure that's put up there, public face, talking head. Anyway, he's saying that we got to get this right because otherwise the bond market is going to crack. This is just the last few days, but there's a whole string of articles on this. The Economists of London led the way back, in early March after the introduction of Liberation Day and the reciprocal tariffs. Almost immediately, the London economists quote America's financial system comes close to the brink. Chaotic markets threaten to trigger a full-blown crisis. CNBC, May 7th. Investors fled to Europe and Japan after Trump's tariffs jolted U.S. markets, Bank of America says. I mean, Brian Moynihan, the head of Bank of America, my God, this was one of the biggest greenies around on Wall Street. Said, look, if the Biden administration can make it profitable, we'll finance the Green New Steel. We don't care about the real world. Just give us the money. I mean, that's Brian Moynihan. That's the Bank of America. Fortune magazine, May 24th. There's a buyer's strike on U.S. assets. Look, Treasury bonds, 20-year, 10-year, sold in this last month, sold in May. Strong markets, no such effect. This is all hooey. This hype. It's just noise. Because underlying all of this noise, in reality, put it in other words, the economy is growing. We're securing the future. And that carries more weight ultimately. But there is the attempt. Jamie Dimon reflects this. These London Economist pieces, Wall Street Journal, they would like to sink. They would like to crack the bond market. But at this point, the world isn't buying it. They can see what Trump is doing. And I would like to just emphasize here, as this is kind of to sashay to a slightly different subject, but it's closely related. People should know what the U.S. Treasury market is. It's not simply the sale of treasuries, pay for U.S. debt. There's also what's called the secondary Treasury market. Not the 36 trillion in national debt. The secondary Treasury market turns over $900 billion a day in Treasury trades of existing treasuries. This is one of the largest market. I think it is the largest market. Maybe currency trading, is larger. But $900 billion a day is traded in the secondary market. Then there's the Treasury futures market. $600 to $700 billion a day is traded in futures on treasuries. Just pure speculation in treasuries. So this is a volatile market because it's a pyramid. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's not because of the U.S. government debt. It's because of all of these games that are played in the financial markets. And that's, ultimately going to have to be disciplined, shall we say, brought under control. And of course, here, just to give you an example of who owns our treasury bonds abroad, here's from a Reuters article. Data shows that UK investors have overtaken China as the second largest non-U.S. holder of treasuries. That's the United Kingdom. Second largest holder of U.S. treasuries, with holdings of $779 billion. This was as of May 16th. The UK, this is from Reuters. UK is typically considered a custodial account, which is generally a proxy for hedge funds. Other countries used by hedge funds are for custody service include the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. That's what makes up the treasury market. Speculators, the spider web of Dope Incorporated. This is who's trying to play games with the American people and with President Trump. But Trump continues to have the upper hand because, in fact, the foundation on which he's standing is what he is doing with the real economy of the United States and what he's doing with these tariff negotiations with these countries around the globe. So I think I've covered that. So let's get to what Trump has unleashed, and I'll try to do this quickly. There's a lot more that can be covered. But of course, first of all, look, the steel victory. This is a real victory. This was done under CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which operates under the Defense Production Act. Trump ordered a new security study, national security study of U.S. steel, and at that point, what was projected to be a buyout of U.S. steel by Nippon. That's CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, did a study officially and said that the deal should not go forward without major changes. President Trump enter into the negotiations, and the outcome is what was announced in a preliminary fashion yesterday there in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania. $14 billion of investment into U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel as a partnership with U.S. Steel. $14 billion of investment. Tens of thousands of jobs will be created. Now, to keep this brief, the U.S. government is going to have a golden share in this agreement. And I'll come back to that in a second. But this agreement is already endorsed by Governor Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. It's endorsed by John Fetterman, U.S. Senator, and other Democrats, as well as, of course, Republicans who helped organize it. People like Pennsylvania State's Senate Pro Tem Kim Ward. I mean, she directly entered into the talks and worked with President Trump in bringing this agreement about. Just to quote her, I had no doubt when Trump decided to review this deal after the Biden administration blocked it, that he would fight for the steelworkers and their families here in Pennsylvania. And that's exactly what Trump did. Now, the golden share that the U.S. government holds to meet the national security requirements of the United States, and this has been covered in the Japanese press over the last week. I followed some of that, and now it's being picked up in the press here. U.S. government will retain a golden share, which means they will ensure that the board is and the CEO are Americans, that the board is majority American, that there will be no layoffs, and if there's any question or not, the U.S. government effectively has a controlling majority, even though they don't own a majority of shares. Their golden share will give them veto power over any policies, and therefore a strong voice in the process going forward. So Trump is ensuring that the U.S. national interests are served. And that's important for the U.S. steelworkers themselves to know that they're going to be protected. And therefore, all the more important what Trump announced in terms of the increase of tariffs from 25 to 50%. This is what guarantees, along with the expensing of new factory builds, of R&D, of equipment purchases, and so on, that grows the economy. That grows employment. That grows the tax base. So that's steel in brief. Just to say, maybe I should just say this. I mean, we now import 25% of our steel. If the economy grows, we're going to have more steel. So where are we going to get that? Well, we're going to produce it here now. We're going to solve this by producing it here. In terms of the aluminum, we import half of our aluminum from Canada, Australia, even Mexico. Those are the three major suppliers. There's only one aluminum smelter, Century Aluminum in Kentucky, which is right now idled that is capable of producing aluminum with the necessary purity for military applications like aircraft and armor plating. One factory, one smelter, and it's now idled. It has been idled for some time. So, this is what the tariff policy is about. We were once the largest steel producer in the world. So the 50% tariff policy is going to be extremely, extremely important. So now I want to turn to the Department of Transportation as another example of what Trump is doing. This is along with what I've covered in my Substack articles and so on. I'm just trying to think in terms of going forward here. Oh yeah, I'll come back to that in a second. But if you could, Tony, if you could go to the fourth slide, the current FAA terminal facility is what it says. Thank you for your help. You can just go through them quickly if you want. You can start with that. That's what I titled this presentation tonight. This is the White House fact sheet on the declaration of a national emergency to increase our competitive edge, protect our sovereignty, and strengthen our national and economic security. That's April 2nd. That was Liberation Day. The next slide. Here, just to deal with this briefly before I go on to the Department of Transportation. There's the argument, interest rates are rising on treasuries. People are afraid to buy them. The people, these speculators, they're shorting treasuries, et cetera, et cetera. They're playing games with this stuff. But anyway, the story in the media is these rising interest rates on treasuries that have to be paid to find buyers. Well, that drives up the mortgage rates. And mortgage rates are now up around 7%. Well, just take a step back and look at this for a minute. Look at interest rates. There's an article, one of the articles, I believe it's the Wall Street Journal. I'll find it here. I'll go back and find it here in a second. Stated that interest rates have not been this high in 2 decades. This is a big nothing burger. Well, look at interest rates. They were at 5.5% in 2005. Is a 30-year Treasury securities, and then they went down. Remember the whole 2008 crash? Zero interest rates. We went to negative interest rates. And bond rates went down to 2 or 3%, right? And then dropped in 2020 with COVID. Everybody was unloading treasuries to get cash because the whole economy was shutting down. It went to virtually zero. And so now it's climbed back up. But historically, interest rates between 5.5%, 7% on mortgages are not high rates. Let's get real about this. This is playing with numbers. Yeah, Trump wants to get the Fed to cooperate and lower interest rates, and he's right to demand it now because inflation is now at 2.1%, right? It's in the domain that the Fed said they wanted to be in terms of inflation rates. But in reality, it's not high interest rates that are preventing people from buying houses. It's the prices of the houses. To give you an idea, inflation in the United States between 1970 and 2021, right? Basically 50 years. Inflation went up 641%. Went up 641% in that period of time. The cost of a house, of the average median home for sale, not necessarily even new, but average home for sale, in that same 51-year period, went up 1,608%. 1,608% compared to 641% in terms of, the official inflation rate. Okay, we know that the official inflation rate doesn't capture full inflation, but nonetheless, it's a useful comparison. The cause was speculation. We have massive speculation and land. This, Wall Street driven speculation, as opposed to productive investment. Banks, equity funds, hedge funds, etc., speculate just like they speculate in commodities. They speculate in real estate, and this is what's driven prices through the ceiling. So there's measures, capital gains tax increases, etc. There's all kinds of things that can be done to bring these prices of housing down. But as well, the most important way overall for the economy is to grow productivity and therefore bring the price of everything down, bring the price of energy, bring the cost of wood products, and so on and so forth. Bring the cost of producing everything down by expanding and growing the economy as a whole. Next slide. And we're caught up with the Department of Transportation here briefly. People don't realize that the U.S. Department of Transportation, you might think, is kind of a ho-hum kind of outfit. They're in the sticks of federal government. But that's because we've had a zero growth economy and we didn't think about these things. The U.S. Transportation Department, now headed up by Sean Duffy as Treasury Secretary, just for starters, has announced that we are going to now build a 21st century air and traffic control system. What you're looking at there in the picture is a current FAA terminal facility. It looks like something out of the 1960s, right? And it is. We have blackouts. You may have heard about this. Newark Airport has become notorious, but also Atlanta and other airports have had blackouts. Newark, Atlanta, Denver, and even down here in Houston's second airport. Blackouts of 60 to 90 seconds where all communications, radar, radio communications between towers and aircraft have been totally lost. Air traffic controllers have been put on trauma leave as a consequence of having to deal with these situations. The equipment is falling apart. Nothing has been done. Nothing was done under the Biden administration. It was known that this was developing. This has been ignored over really decades. But now it's being done. The Trump administration is investing billions of dollars to rebuild the entire air traffic control system of the United States. You can go on to the next slide there as I just go forward on this. Now, these are current air traffic control facilities. On the left, you see you've got a fan, a cooling fan, just a normal household fan is blowing air on a radar system to keep it cool enough to operate. This is what your life hinges on, this kind of thing if you're in a plane today. All right. And on the right, you have a current Alaska flight planning system, using old ribbon cable, but they wrap it with aluminum foil to reduce interference. This is the state of the air traffic control system. Obviously, some is better, some is worse. But overall, 33% of the national airspace system, which is the formal name for the air traffic control system, 33% of it is now facing the risk of discontinuance on its major equipment from its major provider, along with monthly obsolescence fees, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh my God.
It's barely hanging on. 33% of the system. The surveillance system, which tracks weather and planes further out and so forth, gives important data and so on. Um, Portions of its system date back to the 1970s. To remind you, that's 45 roughly years ago, right? Unless I'm counting wrong, 55 to 55 years. Old. Floppy disks are utilized in systems. Parts of the equipment to replace broken parts, they go to eBay to try to find parts to buy, keep systems running. All right. Radios. The radio systems date back to 30 years. They're going to replace 26,000 radios across the country. This is both a statement in a microcosm of the state of U.S. infrastructure because of 50 years of predatory financing and outsourcing and the devolution of the economy, the real physical economy, but also the commitment of Trump and Sean Duffy in the Department of Transportation to now say, no, we've got to start. We're starting with the big, beautiful bill. We're putting money into this right now, starting right now. We're going to rebuild this system. And they're proceeding to do it. This shows you what the Trump administration is committed to. They are committed to rebuilding U.S. infrastructure. So you can move to the next slide. Look, under the U.S. Department of Transportation comes the U.S. Merchant Marine. All right, that's our mariners, civilian mariners. It works in conjunction with the U.S. Navy. It mans U.S. flag vessels. And the whole question of rebuilding our U.S. merchant marine, including ships, the ships themselves, is front and center with the president's executive order restoring America's maritime dominance. We do have 10 major shipyards. But look, the workforce right now of major shipyards in the United States right now, today, are facing 20% attrition rates a year, 20% attrition, and 30% in critical trades. We have an aging workforce, and we got poor pay, and the whole what exists in terms of just stepping back and looking at it, the major shipbuilding outfits in the United States. Military shipping, there's been an increase in the budget to go to 17 ships a year built for the U.S. Navy, primarily submarines, destroyers, and so forth. However, in building submarines, destroyers, and amphibious assault ships under construction today, they're taking 9 years to deliver to the Navy compared to 5 to 6 years in the 2000s, the year 2000 plus. So from 6 years to now takes 9 years on average to build a major ship. I wanted to use this picture here. Just to point out two things. China alone produces 1,800 large commercial vessels a year. That figure is from 2022. Maybe it's slightly more now. 1,800 large commercial vehicles. The United States shipyards produce 5 a year. All right. So clearly we have to get our act together. We've got to rebuild. And that's what the Department of Transportation's Maritime Department is intent on doing together with the president's Maritime Action Plan. I just want to summarize this in terms of the shipping business. This is the executive order for creating a Maritime Action Plan. The order by the president comes under the Defense Production Act, Title III. This is similar to the executive order on mining and ore processing, which I've written about, and it's available on Promethean Action and on my Substack. The Defense Production Act is being used under the declaration of an energy emergency to mobilize resources, manpower, the concepts needed to rebuild the U.S. economy. The Office of the Strategic Capital Loan Program, that's in the Department of Defense, is being mobilized. You have the mobilization of the of other agencies as well under the Defense Production Act, and the Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration. So I think I'll leave it there, but just to conclude, this picture should just make clear to you, building ships is an extremely complicated process, extremely, energy and manpower dense, complex. It's not only modular, it's adopted technologies and planning methods from building airplanes. I mean, this has been done for years. This has been done. And utilized other advanced concepts, statistical process control, to ensure, the uniformity of materials and components and so forth, all of which has to mesh as these modular components are brought together seamlessly into a single ship. This is high tech. This is high tech today, and we've got to get there ourselves. So I think I want to wrap with that. There's a multitude of other areas that can be covered, and we will pick this up again next week. Keisha Rogers and I. First of all, there's DOGE and the coming rescissions legislation, and maybe pocket rescissions as well. And there's Schedule F under EO 14171, restoring accountability to policy influencing positions within the federal workforce. All of these measures are going to continue to move forward to transform the existing federal workforce and bring it under executive control, alongside of Congress, alongside the federal courts. Homes for young families. This is a critical issue. It's only beginning to be dealt with by the administration. I mentioned opportunity zones. That legislation is being reformed completely under the big, beautiful bill. And the coming 2006 fiscal budget bill, with an emphasis on rural, low-income areas for development, for housing, and so forth. I covered this in my last Substack, the executive order on big pharma to give back to Americans most favored nation pricing on pharmaceuticals. That's been an order directed to big pharma, to the companies. If they don't respond within a set period of time, then the Health and Human Services and other federal health-related agencies, Food and Drug Administration, will assert a program that will force that lowering of pharmaceutical prices in the United States. There will be legal challenges, but it's going forward. Fusion and nuclear energy. We'll cover that next week. 4 executive orders have come out on that. We're going to be building nuclear power plants on federal land. There's the Golden Dome Defense Initiative. And kind of running through it all is the Defense Production Act and other federal agencies that may come into play to provide credit to finance a continuing expansion of the U.S. economy. To paraphrase President Trump, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Brian. Quite a talk.